All right. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, beautiful people. Come on, dive on in here. I'm super excited. Y'all guys don't want to miss this morning's talk. Happy Saturday. If you've been keeping up with the news, listen, Dallas, Texas have had its share of national recognition this week, and it wasn't for the Super Bowl. It wasn't for football. It wasn't for the Mavs. It wasn't. It was because of the cold. And so I have joining me this morning someone who is no stranger to the cold. And he's from a great state. He's from a great city that knows how to deal with the cold. And we here in the great state of Texas, we're going to need to learn something from the great state of Illinois. E.C. Cunningham, welcome to Effective Living.
Well, thank you so much, man. Ricardo, it's so great to be here. I appreciate you inviting me, man.
Man, I'm glad that we are able to have this time together. You are in Chicago right now. How is the weather there?
We are in Chicago. If we are covered from head to toe, literally, from roof to ground with cold. But right now it's about 7 degrees, and that's warm. Actually, I was out yesterday, and it was about 21 degrees. Went to the mall and went to a couple spaces, and actually had my jacket open because it felt warmer. It's been the warmest it's been probably in like 2-3 weeks. It's Chicago, man. You get used to it.
Yeah, I bet. Well, it was 7 one day this week here in Dallas. I've been here 20 years, and I've never experienced 7. Okay.
Yeah.
And so that was totally different. As a matter of fact, my water is off now because a pipe burst in the street or something like that.
Oh man!
And it's all off. And so when the snow fell, I went outside and got the trash bin and filled it up with snow, and then went on the stove because the electricity was on for me. And I boiled that water so it can melt down and fill the toilet bowl so I can flush.
Yeah.
You don't want to be in your house for 3 days with not having to be able to flush,
Exactly.
So being from the islands, I had to get creative, and so I'm blessed enough to have firewood and lit the fireplace every day.
Man, well, I'm glad you're doing well, man. It is really, I have so many friends down there. My god kids are down there and such. It's something that you never heard of that's happening there. I lived in Austin for 5 years, almost 5 years. And I looked one day last week, it was -1 there. I was like, man, had I been there and that happened, I probably would have just like lost it. And right now I can tell that right now you guys are going through. So you and I are not just our thoughts and prayers, but really whatever we can do, whatever I can do, man, I'm here for you.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. Listen, our viewing audience this morning, I want you guys to know February is Black History Month here in the United States and in Canada. And I wanted to give some attention to this. I've not done this before. And I said, who else best than to bring my good friend, E.C. Cunningham? We've been friends now for a while in the children's ministry space. More than a decade we've known each other.
Absolutely.
Have been fortunate enough to grace a few stages together. But tell our viewing audience a little bit about you. Before you do that, we have people jumping, and I see Dr. Diana from Fort Lauderdale is joining us. The Bahamas is live and in effect. Then we got, obviously, Dallas is in the house. Canada is always represented. Jamaica is represented. Good stuff, guys.
Wow.
So, EC, tell us a little bit about yourself as we prepare to dive into this conversation.
Well, thank you again for having me here. Well, E pluribus Cornelius Cunningham is my name. I'm named after my dad. I'm a junior, and I'm a musician. I started playing keys, organ, piano when I was about 4. I can play by ear. I'm not maybe the greatest, but I could hold myself on a stage.
Come on, hey, you ain't gonna go broke because musicians gonna get a job. They go
man, at one point that's all I was doing, and I was appreciative for it. Well, sort of. That's what. At one point that's something what I was doing. But anyway, that's a whole different story. But musician ministry, I did ministry from age 20 actually. I just turned 51 on the 17th on Wednesday.
Nice,
So,
nice.
man,
Happy belated birthday.
thank you, man. I appreciate it. But I started doing children's ministry when I was about 20,
Yeah.
and I've been a children's pastor, youth pastor, a campus pastor. I sort of quasi youth pastor now. I say quasi because I feel like I'm failing at it. Kids in this generation, they do not want to be online because they're online for everything, but that's a whole different story too.
Yeah.
I love doing motivational stuff. I do video writing, have authored a small book, and I like to write. Believer in God, believer in Jesus, the Word. I'm a believer in the church, and a proponent and champion for the Black church, and just a dude that loves fashion, technology, all that good stuff. So, and like to think, man, like to dialogue and have these type of conversations, and hopefully come out of them great.
You know, my first Uber ride was with you, man.
Oh, really? I remember that ride.
Yeah. We went to the Apple store, in Chicago. And I was like, what's this dude doing jumping in somebody's car?
Man, I remember that trip, and in fact, I remember being on the train, man, and I remember texting you because you were on the tip phone, and I texted you, it was like, put your phone away, man. We in the hood. It wasn't hood, but we was on the train, and you don't be just texting on a Chicago train.
Yeah, that was the first as well. That was the first.
Really
being on the train in Chicago. I had done New York, but not Chicago train. So thank you for that experience. I'll never forget it, man. I was like, this dude just jumped in somebody's car. I thought it was a nice car.
Exactly, man. We were in traffic a while trying to get back to that hotel for that conference, man. And that experience, I remember because there was some really great conversation and great trips, and like you say, firsts for you.
Man, awesome stuff. Listen, this month is Black History Month.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote down some stuff. I said, I want you to dive into this. There are a lot of people like me who are not as informed as they need to be in relations to a time like this. And so here on Effective Living, it's all about helping people to understand truth that will bring about a greater level of life. I see Ashley Cotton. Ashley is from Chicago. Are you from Chicago or outside of Chicago? Some people... EC, I think some people say they're from Chicago, but the truth is, come on, you know what I'm saying?
Exactly. They live in Schaumburg.
For years, I traveled to Chicago, I think maybe 10, 15 years every year to do a conference. I thought it was Chicago. I kept saying Chicago. They marketed it as Chicago, but it was Rosemont. Rosemont. And I used to say, hey, I'm going to Chicago. And the reality was I had never been downtown. I had never I had never seen that there was a harbor in that bad boy with nice yachts and all that good stuff.
Absolutely.
Until 10 years later, having been to Illinois a few times, but never going downtown. So, there's some people who ain't really from Chicago. They try to claim Chicago.
Exactly, man. Exactly. Well, I grew up in the south suburbs, but then I lived in the city over the summers with my aunt. So I can claim both. And then as an adult, man, I lived nothing but in Chicago, from Roseland to where I am now, and just all over.
I went last year, 2 years ago. I went in and I went. I think it was West Side.
Oh,
I guess I didn't know this was Chicago. Come on, this is a little different right here.
Yeah, man. You can get in some places and some pockets of Chicago and not know you're in Chicago. And that could be a good thing, and that could be an experience.
I went to the side they call Chirac. Anyhow, man, let's dive into our talk, man. History Month. How important is the recognition of this month? I was doing some study. I found out that there was first a slight recognition of a week. College campuses actually took it by force first before nationally it was really recognized. Certain presidents recognized it before one president decided to fight to push it as a real idea, and then Congress established the month. But give us your thoughts on why Black History Month. And you got, before you do that, another Chicago is hot today because Lee is in.
That's what what's happening, Cherie? That's like, girl. So, I think the Black History and not just the week or the month, I think Black history needs to be talked about. Is very important because quite honestly, for 400 years, we've been the integral part of the development of this country, actually. Everything from the cotton industry to the appliances, the filament light, the things. I was talking to someone the other day and was sitting in the kitchen looking and was thinking, like, we have hands in almost every appliance and every invention in the household. We spent a lot of time, for those who were Black people who were allowed in the household during the slavery times, we spent a lot of time there. So we learned how to develop things and make life easier. So, I mean, the conversation is important because we've helped build this country. I mean, from the music to entertainment and the sports that we enjoy now, is predominantly Black and brown people. So we've built and sustained this country. And so not to just have a week and a month, we really should be talking about Black history and Black presence daily. It's who we are. And we're not just pioneers, but we're prominent in America and around the world. And we've been doing it in this country for 400 years, enslaved, but now have somewhat an advantage in some areas. But even around the world, we've been prominent. So it's a matter of just the conversation needing to be had.
Thank you for sharing that. The past 2 decades have been, some would say, extremely progressive for African Americans here in this country, more specifically. What's your view on that?
Yeah, everything from Condoleezza Rice and Colin Powell in the last 20 years, we've seen those leaders and secretaries of state. We've had the first Black president and first Black first lady, and then now the first Black female as well as vice president in Kamala Harris. And so, I think what we've seen over these 20 years is an idea of Black excellence. The Black Lives Matter movement has come and kind of taken the forefront to speak where the church used to be the prominent in that. So I think we're not only making marks, but we can't be avoided. This conversation can't be avoided. So in the last 20 years, we've just kind of stepped up our presence. Again, going back to that word presence, I think in this last 20 years, in the private and the public sector, we've become a voice.
You think would it be safe to say that prominence was always there? It was just that nationally recognized was the thing? Talk to us about that.
Yeah. I think prominence has always been there. Again, we've been, you have Frederick Douglass, you have Booker T. Washington, you have these statesmen and these gentlemen, and you have the Fannie Lou Hamers and Harriet Tubman's Sojourner Truth. You have these voices and these people, your Maya Angelou's. You have the voices and the people who've done prominence, but it's been few and far between. And everybody loves Dr. King, loves his voice, but people didn't and couldn't get with Malcolm X or even Fred Hampton or Huey Newton, the ones who from the gutter or from the ground that was saying, we see this and we're not going to let white supremacy or racism or being treated unjustly and unfair stand without some kind of fight, whether that is verbal or verbose or whether that was, actually getting out there in the streets and making a difference. So I think, you're right. We've been prominent, but the voices now are heard a little differently. And then with social media, Dr. King had a voice that went across the world, and he happened to be a voice for a generation and a people. I think now with social media, we all have a voice. And it reminds me of a Proverbs that says that we should speak up for those who can't speak for themselves, and have justice for the oppressed. So, I think we all have now that ability to have some prominence. Where we are.
Where with all that's going on, you mentioned a few names that are highly recognized during Black History Month, but there are names that oftentimes don't get the attention that should be getting a little bit more attention. What are some of those names or individuals that would pop to mind? You mentioned some of them already. You could reiterate and say why you think, be it as it may, they may have had certain different philosophy from a Dr. King, but at the end of the day, they initially helped set the stage as well.
So 2004, I think it was 2005, I got an award for community service here in Chicago, but I never mentioned it. I put it in my office, but really never said anything to anybody. It was from, and probably because of kind of the backlash that I felt it would come from it, but Fred Hampton Jr., the son of Fred Hampton, gave me an award for working in the Black community here in Roseland, in Chicago. And I kind of shied away from saying anything because of what his dad was a prominent figure in the Black community. He brought people together. I had always known what the Black Panther Party was, but I grew up in the South suburbs of Chicago, had a Black family. We taught things, but in school we weren't taught things correctly always. So I was integrated. And so you hear a name like Fred Hampton or the Black Panther Party, it was looked at as a revolutionary group, but it was not looked at as the things that they actually did. My mom, where we grew up, right next door to us, there was a house that was owned at one point by Jeff Ford, who was a leader of a prominent gang in Chicago. But it was people like Jeff Ford and Fred Hampton who were leaders of these groups that were looked at as vigilantes and outlaws. But they actually did things for our people in where they were. Initially, the gangs were part of community watch over in our areas. So I mentioned those two names. There might have been some tainting behind some of what they did. There might have been some crime that has been associated with some of those leaders, but for the most part, I mention those names because they were men who were speaking out and had women who were speaking out. They created the first breakfast. You're exactly right. They created things like breakfast clubs and after school programs and different things. So, that was birthed out of the necessity in our communities where white policing was coming in and terrorizing our people, not just serving and protecting our people. So, you had to have these groups who actually came in. So I mentioned Fred Hampton, not Fred Hammond, Fred Hampton. But what I really would suggest watching that movie, Judas and the Black Messiah, because that really talked a lot about like his ability to bring people together. So it was people like him. I mentioned Jeff Ford. I mentioned there's some others that really our people, whether it was Jesse Jackson or the people behind Jesse Jackson, whether it was Al Sharpton or the people behind Al Sharpton. We know the names that were on the stage, but there were plenty of people who actually moved the ball forward. Right. John Lewis came out front as time went on, but he was behind certain movements. There were women who were behind those movements. So, the names that we mention are often the ones that are palatable for other races. But there are other people who actually did some amazing things, and their names aren't always. And I mentioned just only two, maybe three.
Thank you for sharing that. I was reading something about hip hop and how what was started.
Chuck D.
Yeah, and one of the guys that were being interviewed, he said, everybody's talking Master P and P Diddy and what's the guy's name from
Jay-Z?
New York? No, with the credit card, he was one of the first.
Oh, 50. Oh, Rush. Not Rush. The Rush card is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Man, why can't I think?
Yeah.
I know who you're talking about, and I'll say it just in a second. I'm looking at his face, and I can't. His brother, from Run DMC, Reverend Run, his brother. That's it. Gosh.
It'll come.
Last name beginning with a S.
Yeah, somebody put it.
First name with an R. Okay.
Russell Simmons.
Russell Simmons. Okay, there you go. That's so bad. So bad.
But
Crush Groove.
But I was reading this, and he said, the guy was saying, everybody's talking Russell Simmons, they're talking Master P. But he said, but there was some cats before those guys who actually set the stage up for the space to become what it was. And these guys just learned somewhat how to commercialize it and brought money into that particular space that made it a much more bigger genre and prominent platform. I would you say, is it safe to say similar is viewed maybe from the message that has gone out over the years from the need to address the concerns of the African American?
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that. I was going to buy a book yesterday. I ended up buying, and I haven't read it, but this book here, The Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. I just bought this yesterday, and another one by Michael Eric Dyson, with dealing with racism in America, finally our facing of it. But there was a book called The Three Kings that talks about Jay-Z, Diddy. Talks about Diddy, Jay-Z, and who was the third? I haven't read it yet, but I was going to buy that. And that's, now that I know that's the book, you're making me, I think, when we get off, they open at 11. I'm going back to the bookstore to get it. It's a Black bookstore here in Chicago called Semicolon, and man, I'm not getting paid for this. But they have a lot of books that I was looking at yesterday, and that's one of them. And I will go back and get that today. Now that you said that.
Yeah, that was a great book. Listen, let's. 2020, we had a number of major injustice nationally, major protests. In your view, what do you see, happening this year, last year, that is somewhat helping the understanding that, there are certain things that still needs to be addressed, and we're definitely not where we're needing to be?
Well, I dare say this, and I don't want it to sound trite, but Black is the new Black right now. It's cool to be Black. It's the first time in America, I think, that the conversation is prominent, and it's almost like if you're not having the conversation about systemic racism or white supremacy or justice for Breonna Taylor and others, you are almost on the outside at this point. It's bad, and I started off saying that could be a negative thing, because it's bad to have to become a ticker or a talking point or a line for white people in white America to get it, even the white church to get it. It's bad that things like has happened over the last year to have to happen for us to become a conversation. But it's great because now you have to have the conversation. There are companies, there are Fortune 500s and #1 companies. Apple is having the conversation and being part of that conversation, you're seeing that there are companies who are saying we're going to put people in certain places of prominence. Yes, that's the book. We're going to put people, and we're going to put not just people, but we're going to do things in communities of color to help not just even the playing field. You know, we got a 400-year catch up we have to do, but at least bring some voices to the table. There's hiring of more Black and brown people in these companies in prominent areas. I was in a store the other day, and they had a I can't remember what store it is, but they had a big like section, a wall, kind of a mural, and they talked about what they're getting ready to do and how they're changing their company. So, you know, over the last, going back to your question, over the last year, it has caused the world, specifically this world in North America, to have a conversation we have not had in a while. And it's caused us to really start digging out, whether it's in the secular or the sacred, digging out, you know, these areas, these systemic racist areas, and to have these conversations, everything from redlining of our communities to, you know, Black people only being allowed in certain areas, to again the corporations. So and then even in the church, that's a whole different conversation in and of itself.
You know, with all that's happening, what do you still see still needing to be addressed at the core? Like, you're like, hey man, there's still a lot of avoidance.
You know, I think our education system, there's a lot of disparity in how we educate Black and brown kids. The access, from a technological standpoint, there's a gap between the home of a Black person or a Hispanic person, between that home or a person from the islands here in this country. There's a difference in our access as far as technology, in our schools, in our homes, in our communities. The Google, and I'm not putting them on blast, but Google Fiber isn't being laid in my community where I live here in Chicago. But when I was in Austin, that was like, they were doing that quickly. They're laying it in other communities here in Chicago, but in the Black community, it's not happening. So there's disparities in technology, there's disparity in education, there's disparity even in we have food deserts in our community. There are not any major prominent grocery stores or places. Like, there's a fight every time you try to get a Walmart in a city radius. You know, it's just a lot of things. Those things, judicial system. I think our judicial system needs an overhaul. The policing, and then again the church. And the church. Obviously, we know the marketplace definitely needs to. Again, there are companies now stepping up saying, "Hey, we need to be more inclusive in our hiring process. We need to be more inclusive in who's at our boardroom tables." But those other areas touch the lives of Black and brown people every day. You know, whether, again, education, food, technology. These are things that are ground, and again, the judicial system. These are places and areas in our lives that really need not just overhauling, but real voice. And it's one thing to have representation, it's another to have inclusion. And so we need Black people and brown people at the table, and having the conversation and leading the conversation.
You know, thank you for sharing that. You know, there are some maybe watching us, or even of the mindset that, man, haven't there been a lot of progress? Why are y'all still having this talk? When is enough? When, and the reality of it is one of the things that I've come to learn, EC, is that, and I've traveled enough to realize that I could be living in a bubble and don't know it.
Absolutely.
I could be living in a bubble and have no clue that on the other side of town, this is a reality. And I think some of what is being highlighted is bringing some reality, but there are some people who are thinking bringing the reality of a global view or a national view of real injustice is a problem when there is some form of progress. What do you say to that person who's trying to say, you know what, get over yourselves? There's massive progress that is happening when it comes to African American people of color. Where's the insensitivity to them, and what is the right response, would you say, to help them understand we got a lot of work to do in spite of all that we still consider to be some form of progress?
I would tell that person to get in their car today and start driving. Yeah. And when you cross the tracks, there still is that distinction in community. When you cross that track or go under that viaduct, as we call it here in Chicago, viaduct, if you go across that track or go into that community and you look at the roads, you look at the pavement, you look at the areas that have not been taken care of, and you're in the same city, you have the same mayor, you have the same governor, then you start seeing why the conversation is necessary. Because, and I said I was going to do a study. I would love to do a study on this. You don't have Midas and all of these different car auto repair places and transmission places in white neighborhoods as much. Why? Because the roads are well. See, the more a Black person rides in potholes and in these areas, it tears up the bottom of our car. Yeah. Then we have to go get it repaired. And so it's in our neighborhoods, not because we have the worst cars, it's because our roads tear up our cars. And so I would tell that person to look at some of the basic things that you have and things that you don't notice. Drive around your neighborhood and see if you see an auto mart, or see if you see it, not an auto mart, AutoZone. Yep. See if you see an AutoZone or a Midas or any of these car repair places in your neighborhoods. See if you see some of the things that you see in a Black, and then go to a Black or brown neighborhood and drive around and see some of the things we see as necessary for us, because it's not needed, because of how the same mayor, the same governor, the same officials treat those areas. Money's not pouring in. And you might say, well, it has to do with our taxes. We pay more taxes. Our houses are bigger. Just that. We can't pay some of our taxes because we're not given the right jobs. We're not given opportunities as others. The education system. So there's all of that is stemmed from systemic things that have happened over the years that have piled up. And so when you look at this conversation, is necessary because it needs to be called out. Yeah, so that's my thought.
let's talk about this for a few minutes. The person who knows they're qualified but know they're going to be passed over because they're Black.
Man, I wrote a note last night. I was thinking about that aspect. There are people who are fully qualified, but because your name is Shanika and not Sharon, you may not get to the table. In fact, I was talking to a friend of mine who I work with. His mother was a hiring manager for a major corporation. I won't say the name, but he said, my mother has told me this in hiring practices, when it came to resumes coming across her desk for years, there were names, when you saw certain names, those names were immediately passed over because you knew what they and who, or you assumed who they were connected to. And so a lot of times brothers and sisters that look like us don't even apply for them because they know, first of all, they can't get in the door, maybe because of a name, or once they get in the door, there's always 2 or 3 extra steps that they have to take. I remember going to, honestly, going to a bank, applying for a bank. And when I got there for the actual interview, when the lady asked me my name and I said e pluribus, my last name is Cunningham. When she said, what's your name? And I said e pluribus Cunningham, she was like, she was looking up from her desk. She was like, oh, she wasn't expecting a Black man because my last name was Cunningham, which is Irish. And so it made her, she reacted and she didn't realize that it was that obvious. But I realized it, having grown up with the name and grown up in the space. So, you know, a lot of brothers and sisters don't apply for certain things. Sometimes it stops there at the name. Sometimes it is, they're qualified, sometimes overqualified. And I have a friend who was told several times that they were overqualified for jobs. And so, you know, that doesn't have anything to do with, if you need somebody to wash dishes, and a person comes in who needs a job to wash dishes, how are you overqualified to wash dishes? Like, and I'm not saying that's what this job was, but sometimes there are excuses given to so many people because of their skin color, or after they walk in, whether it's their name or whether it's just they see what school they went to. So it's really a challenge.
Yeah.
For Black and brown people. I'm sorry.
Let's talk about this, and I'm going to move on because we're almost out of time. But
okay, I'm sorry, man.
Also,
get me excited.
There's this view that a person of color has to perform 3 to 5 times that of the counterparts, and if they're going to get the position, if they will get a seat at the table, it will be because they're doing 3 to 5 times more. Give us some understanding of that.
I think where it becomes a major thing is, are you articulate enough to give a sentence or give a thought that's logical, that can be accepted by people of other races and your counterparts who are white and other ethnicities in a corporate environment or any environment. And so you have to be articulate. You have to look a certain way. My mother, when I was in 7th grade, we went to the mall. She bought a polo shirt, sort of like what you're wearing now, but it was pink, some Argyle socks at J. Crew.
She put you in some pink. She put you in some J. Crew, bro.
Yeah, she did. And some penny loafers at that time that was popular. And she said, this is how a young man dress. If you want to get somewhere in life, you got to. And this was before like the baggy pants and stuff like that, but we still had our style. But she set me up in her mind. She was setting me up for success at 12 years old to say, part of what you have to do is not only do you have to know the part once you get there, but sometimes you got to look the part before you get there, because you won't be noticed if you look like everybody else. And so, you know, it's not just what we do all the time, it's how we present ourselves. So it's the clothes, it's the hair. And look, I'm so glad Black hair is in right now. Like we can be ourselves, but those things count. And so the being 5 times better and 10 times better, after you finally are presentable enough to get in the door, then you have to be able to think of the ideas. You have to watch and know who you're talking to and who's talking to you. It's hard to know that I'm talking to this person and this person may be talking to somebody else, and your ideas may be spent and made to look either bad or it may become their idea. And so you have to keep everything in writing. There was one point I remember working where I would have to write everything down when I was working for this bank some years ago, and I became a supervisor. I had to start writing stuff down, that the conversations I was having, because it may not be believed.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? So you have to think you're playing chess. You're not playing checkers.
Is it safe to say people of color have learned how to shift and know how to, if you're going to progress, you got to know how to walk in the room. And there is a time to be urban or to be a person of color, and then there's a time where you have to shift, there is no one standard way of showing up, and is it that we're becoming more a standard of showing up now? We got the Jay-Z who's saying, you know what, I'm gonna be me, and I'm gonna still be at the top. What's your view on that?
Yeah, it's code switching is what it is. And you have to learn how to talk a certain way when you get in a certain room. And there's one man I worked with, a pastor, James Meeks, who has been over the years. I have seen him. He was a state senator as well. And I've seen him be the same person wherever he was. You have your few people who can be themselves and have the confidence in being that self. And then you have others who've had to walk that thin line because of where they are and their experience. And I know for me, and this is a conversation I have consistently, having to code switch is something that you really, you have to do. There's a comedian from here, Chicago. His name's Dion Cole. He talks about it in one of his comedy stand-ups called Cold Blooded. He talks about James at work. He says, he has this line of saying, that James, that ain't the James. That ain't the same James. The James that you work with, that ain't the same James. When he ain't there, he's talking a little different when he at home, And so there's this reality, because what it becomes, and this is the reality. Why is there code switching? Why is this necessary? Because there is this sense of aggression that a Black man or a Black woman it may seem to have, or seem to be projected upon, is that we have to shift, because when you talk a certain way, it sounds like you're aggressive. Or for a woman, she's the mad Black woman, or she is, she got to do certain things. She has an attitude. And I was talking to a young man at my job, and then I'll close with this. I was talking to a young man at my job the other day, and he was saying, man, I have, and they may watch this and may, but it is what it is. He was saying, I have these conversations with white females, and that's the way he said it, white females. And as I'm having conversation, everybody's like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, why are you angry? And he's like, I'm just passionate about stuff. Because he's from Inglewood here in Chicago, and the way he talks and the way he carries himself, he doesn't code shift or anything for anybody. No. And the way he talks, though, for some people, it sounds like he's angry all the time. When he's passionate, whether it's about a computer or whether it's about his community, he's passionate. And when he talks, some people feel that that's being aggressive, and it's not. And he was talking to me, and he was like, you see, I just don't know how to handle this, that people keep saying I'm sound angry. And so I gave him some rules and some tools. I think that, yeah, some rules and some tools. And he went back and had a conversation. But this was the thing. He still was himself, but he had a conversation with someone who could make a difference. And he told, and it was a white female, and he said, hey, look, I'm passionate. I ain't angry. And that person said, wow, I've never heard it put that way. And and that person had that conversation with the rest of the staff. So it's the code switching happens because we are either angry, aggressive, and people are not always with that, and it's not that they're intimidated by our presence.
Let's bring it home, man, with diversity at a higher level, because you mentioned it a little bit, but there definitely needs to be more of a diverse acceptance. I'm thinking it's happening in certain areas. Years ago, a lot of people didn't realize New York had embraced certain level of diversity, so much more than obviously any of the state cities in the South, right? You had the New York, you had the LA, you had certain areas where there was there was some form of integration naturally happening. And then there were areas where the line was just really, really drawn very clear. from companies to community organizations to
Mm-hmm.
service groups to churches that are still could be considered white churches and black churches.
Absolutely.
Diversity. Talk to us about that in the overall scheme of things.
Well, I think with now diversity, what's happening in America is America is diverse, not just in its racial palette or its color scheme, but people themselves are diverse. Being in America, Kamala Harris is a great example, is to be Black, to be Asian, American. So that diversity can't be avoided. I think it was Louis Farrakhan, Louis Farrakhan, who talked about, by 2050, I think it is, or 2038, 2050, that if things continue to go the way they are, the majority of people will be people of color. We already see that happening when it comes to Hispanic people. And so diversity, as time has progressed, has not just happened in environments, it's happened to people with interracial marriages and interracial dating and of such that and that's not a negative thing. I'm not saying, I'm not looking at it as negative. I'm just saying the reality is diversity is happening whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
And so that's causing for a need for companies and churches and people to understand those different dynamics. When you're putting white families with Black families, you have a Black father, a white father, maybe divorced, and they get together, a Black father and a white mother, or whatever your case is. I said that the way I did, Black father, white father, whatever the case is, you're putting these blended families together, and that's a reality. And so companies, churches, communities have to prepare themselves. Well, it's too late. If you're not prepared, you're behind the 8 ball because it's happening already.
Yeah, you're so right. A few years ago, I read a book that actually said the reason why, and a lot of people probably don't know this or even view it like this, but it says the reason why the United States is such a superpower is because of its diversity.
Mm-hmm,
and a lot of times we don't talk about it from a global scope, but when you only got one set of people fighting a diverse group of people, the diverse group of people is going to come a little bit more skilled because of the diverse options. It's building a dynamic team is built up of diversity.
The cultures and all of that comes along with that diversity.
Yeah. So bringing in people from different countries of different ethnicity, all of that, a lot of countries don't allow it. So if you got a country, let's just say if it's all African, you got Uganda, not realizing that because it's all Ugandans, it actually weakens the Uganda space. When if you have South Africa is more diverse as an African. You know what I'm saying? Europe, when you go to London is diverse. And so to be only you is to actually be limited, but to have diversity is to have strength.
Yeah. When you can bring all of that to the table, I look at, we've used in the over years that America being the melting pot of the world and the jambalaya of the world, all of that makes for good. In jambalaya, all those different ingredients makes for good soup. It's the matter of how you bring those cultures to the table and the diversity that you have. I mean, food is a great example of bringing the different cultures and all that. We experience all of these great opportunities when you bring everyone to the table and all the voices. The cultural spectrum adds to the conversation. So, diversity here in America, especially, but in the world, diversity is definitely necessary. And if we don't get it, the people who don't get it lose out more than they really think they do.
Final question. Dr. Frederick Price passed this past week. He was obviously a renowned teacher of the Word of God, but beyond that, early on, he decided to address a series that some would probably say tarnish his name
Yeah.
and probably took him off the national scene at the
Yeah.
level that he was initially at when he talked about racism and the church and Sunday being the most diverse day of the Sunday being the most segregated day
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
week rather than diverse day. And so
Yeah.
what's your view on what Dr. Price, if you remember that series or any of the messages,
Yeah.
and where we are?
Yeah, that's so interesting. I said I was going to go back and look at some of that because he, for that time period, had become an anomaly. Nobody was talking about it. It was Dr. King on April 17th, 1960, who said it first, that Sunday mornings is our most segregated hour, 11 o'clock is our most segregated hour. But Dr. Price picked up that mantle and from a national and international standpoint, just brought 76 weeks of a conversation about racism and specifically in the church. And I don't know if you know the backstory. It was, do you know any of the backstory of how it happened? So long story short, Kenneth Hagee was a friend of his. His son was preaching a message, and Dr. Price heard it. Someone sent him the tape, and his son had said that he had always taught his daughters not to date outside their race. And he was preaching this in a sermon. And he was saying this in his local congregation, and he was saying why he didn't believe that mixing race was great, even at that time. And so it was from that conversation, and because Kenneth Hagee was Hagen, I said Hagee, Hagen, Kenneth Hagen was his friend. Dr. Price felt betrayed. He did not know that he had stood next to this young man. He had prayed next to this young man. And yet this young man was teaching that to his daughter and his child. And so, he's saying to himself, like, here it is, we worship together, but we really don't worship together, if that makes sense. And so it was from that conversation, and from that, he began to expose these things. And so for me, I think it's happened in the church. It's just not been talked about for years, and Sunday morning has always been that. And for 400 years, though, they were lynching our people. They would go to church. The white masters would go to church and then make an announcement that they were going to hang a Negro, and I'm using that word because I don't want to be offensive, because not everybody uses the other word. But they would hang us that afternoon at 5 o'clock, and they would have a picnic before and after the hanging, and they would all gather around the pictures. But it was happened at church. They would make these announcements at church. They would go worship and they go hanging. You saw it on January 6th here in America. They stormed the Capitol, got in the Capitol, talked about hanging some people and assassinating the people, and then they prayed in the chambers, in the chambers. So what I'm saying is, this conversation has been happening or not happening for years, and it's been happening with the white church, white evangelical church, for years. And I think not just there. Let's look back at Acts chapter 6. I mean, I don't want to go into a sermon, but Acts chapter 6, the Hellenistic Jews had to come to the apostles and say, look, our widows are being discriminated against because they didn't speak the language, because they were of a different culture. And that happened. And the apostles' response was, well, get y'all some men who has the Holy Spirit, who's filled with the Holy Spirit, who has wisdom and has the ability to serve these tables, because we want to be about preaching and praying. We can't handle this. And so you saw it even in biblical times. You've seen it over years here. So Dr. Price, in addressing it, was an anomaly, and it needs to be addressed now. And it is being addressed even more so. I'm so glad for friends of mine like Charlie Dates and others who are addressing the Southern Baptist Convention, who've left the convention now, as Black people, because they will not denounce some of the systemic ideas in their theology, even in and man, it's slipping my mind, but the conversation around race, a critical race conversation. Basically, there are those that are in those denominations who are not having the conversation and will not denounce some of that. So long story short, man, Dr. Price really helped move the ball some in the 80s and early 90s. But we have an opportunity now as Black churches and Black people and people of color to really address the issue even more so. And it needs to be addressed.
Hey, final question. Systemic racism. Some people just don't get it. They don't understand the root of it. They don't understand why it's considered a view. Can you enlighten us, help us to understand, those who are watching? Because there are some people who will say, I don't think we have a problem.
So systemic racism, I'm trying to calculate it in one thing. It's when you have systems or entities that automatically have an unconscious bias set up when it comes to to people of color, where whether you see it overtly or not, there are ways that people are separated and segregated based upon their color. Good example is public housing was a systemic racism, and they thought that was a great thing to give Black people their own high rises in Chicago, city of Chicago, and around this nation. But it was really redlining because you wanted to keep Black people in a certain place, and it was the system. You build a building in the 40s, and you stop servicing the elevators that were built in the 40s. You're automatically going to get degradation, and you stop servicing the parking lots, you stop servicing the building, you put up gates across the balconies. It becomes like a prison. You set up toilets that looked like prison toilets in the units. The units were 300 feet for 4 kids. All of that's systemic racism. And if you want to know more, I would love to have that conversation with you.
Man, I appreciate this talk this morning. Obviously, I've had so many saying this has to be a continual conversation. I have had some subject matters that I saw the need to bring back to the table. And this is definitely one, my friend, that I'm going to have to bring back to the table more frequently.
I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, I have a responsibility. And I think there's obviously, when it comes to effective living, some people can't live at the level that they're destined to live or was created to live, because there are some roadblocks that if they don't understand, all cards aren't equally distributed in the best fair way, And so absolutely. Thank you. Listen, how can people contact you, follow you on social media and so forth?
So on Twitter, I'm EC Cunningham. I'm at EC Cunningham. On Instagram, I'm at ePluribus, my first name, EPLURIBUS. If you want to contact me by email, it's ePluribus at leadersimage.org. ePluribus at leadersimage.org or EC at eccunningham.com. That's an easy one. And then my website is eccunningham.com, and that's more of a blog. And those are the things.
Do you have any information like this on your blog? I mean,
actually, I started a conversation last month, and even though this is Black History Month, I started the conversation last month. I will be continuing. That's why I'm sort of reading some of these books, and not just sort of why I'm reading some of this, because that is my next step. If you go to my Instagram, I'm always posting something here and there on Instagram and Twitter.
Excellent. Thank you very much for doing such an exceptional job.
I appreciate you, man. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm excited about this because I think I'm enlightened. I appreciate what I've just heard and what I'm learning, and I'm loving what's starting to happen even more. So thank you for being a statesman, man. Thank you for doing what you do.
I appreciate you, man, and I thank you for this opportunity. I'm learning too, and I hope to have more of these conversations to learn more.
Excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, there you have it, guys. If you enjoyed this conversation, subscribe to the YouTube channel, share the link with someone and say, hey, check this out. There are some interesting truths here that will help someone move from where they are to probably a little bit further on their journey and understanding all that's happening within our nation and ultimately our world. Here on Effective Living, our goal is to help you create a life you don't need a vacation from. So if you have not got my book, get the book. But here's the deal. I understand that as we aim to live life under certain basic principles, rules that governs humanity when it comes to creating an amazing life, there are also unwritten rules. If not talked about, you can still find yourself stuck and frustrated. That's the reason why we decided to have a conversation like this today, to talk about the things very few people talk about. Once again, thank you, EC. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Appreciate you, Ricardo.